One day, while at school, I ended up talking to one of the chaff kids on the playground. He wore a dirty Nike cap, and instead of Pokemon, he traded in football cards. And he also said that he had a PS1 at home and that he had this cool game that I needed to see. Now, I'm gonna be real here, I didn't like this kid. He smelled funny, his mom looked like an alcoholic, mainly because she was, and he was also rude as fuck. Of course, looking back at it now, poor kid was just a victim of a shitty environment, but for that one day, I was too. As I went with him to his house, where, upon entering, I wasn't greeted by the walls lined with my mom's art I had grown accustomed to, but instead with water-damaged ceilings and paint-chipped walls. His room was a mess as well. Clothing donned the floor with cat puke and stains of ketchup binding it together as a lone disc of FIFA Who Gives a Fuck reflected the light from the lone unprotected light bulb precariously hanging from the ceiling. I felt unsafe and kinda gross, and it was in this environment that he showed me the cool game. And that game was also grimy, tortured, mean, unsafe, dark, and gross. In a good way, mind you. Artistic vision can go a long way, and this influential little cinematic shit certainly had loads of it.
Poor, gross little Abe lived his poor, gross little life in the poor, gross little world.
In which one big factory ruled all. It makes food, but does so at the cost of the wildlife, producing so much that it pushes entire species to extinction. And while Abe thought he was living the good life as an enslaved janitor, the factory now turns to him and this whatever the fuck he is as a source for their new product. And so you must revolt by cleverly climbing and puzzling your way around these one-hit kill guards, freeing the other whatever the fuck they are as you go. Now initially, it might not seem all that different from the other games in its genre. You got the long-winded climbing animations of Flashback of Persia, the slow turns and rigid walk cycles of JJ's Missing World, and the difficulty and frequent deaths of all of the above. However, it has one key mechanic setting itself apart. Well, the amazing setting and gross industrial atmosphere do that too, but Abe can talk. He must revolutionize after all, so therefore there is game speak. You hold down a shoulder and tap face to talk, and ask them to follow so you can lead them out, or to their deaths. Much less your own, as it's actually a pretty tricky game as well. Even something as otherwise simple as clearing a gap is hard due to how stiff the grid-based jumping is, and pretty much everything kills you in one hit too. Deactivating bombs with really precise timers, getting shot, falling down hole, saw blades, motion detectors. Everything is out to get you, and get you it will. Shit's kinda trial and error-y, I guess, especially early on when it's still introducing loads of ideas. It is good, just a bit tedious. I mean, the story is cool, the world is amazing, the music is awesome, the mechanics at their core are all really playful and innovative, the controls are, well, what they are, but it's the frequent deaths and the sparse checkpoints that kind of fumble my fucko a little bit. Word on the street is, as well, is that its sequel is much better, far more forgiving, and also the fan favorite, which begs the question why that wasn't on here too. I suppose we'll never know, just like how we won't ever find out why all of these games are on the system but aren't accessible. May have just been some test ROMs actually, but hey. I could never beat this game. I played it loads as a kid, yet tried as I might it, I was unable to make it past the music world. So, I figured it would be neat to see if I could do so now as an adult. And, well, I was able to make it through the first level just fine. Raychild controls well, his jumping arc is comfy and adjustable, and nothing's too loose or rigid. The second level properly introduces the idea of secrets and death, because there's loads of vines and high-up platforms that require great precision and calculated jumping to find precision and calculated jumping. Also great-ass atmosphere. There's no music present at first, just nature sound and really detailed art. But as you progress through the level, the music slowly Euro-platformers its way in. Enemies begin to pop, checkpoints start to happen, platforms narrow, and huge, hulking sprites cover the screen, forcing the game to use orb-based breadcrumbs to lead you to safe havens. This already sets up something that could be a major issue, not knowing where the fuck. Which it immediately becomes as well. Plus, the platforms and enemy combinations soon begin to donkey some countries, only where donk has a very clear rhythm and timing to it, Rayman's cluttered and animation-heavy ass does not. Signified perfectly by this very French character design giving you the ability to rocket to punch! With the khaki caveat that it needs to slowly pull back after big charge, making it rather hard to time your hits properly. I can also see this becoming a major issue. Punching shit does feel pretty great though. The piranha's teeth satisfyingly break with big lo-fi sound effects, and the general dudes will fucking fly off screen last battle style. It's neat, it's fun, and oh no, slow-moving projectiles randomly coming at you and enemies with invincibility windows. Both of which, depending on how they're used, can also end up becoming major issues. First off, the boss fight though, who is fun. Very Mario Land 2 with the patterns and the screen entries. You even befriend his ass and proceed to write it through what can only be described as "Our engine wasn't fully built for this as the hit detection is very iffy due to our giant fucking sprites and crazy animations, but then we didn't really want to have this song go to waste either." Said hit detection, by the way, also potentially being a major issue. In any case, we now get the ability to hang from ledge, only to then... Oh. So, as established, we have a fair few idiosyncrasies that could end up becoming major issues. Whether or not if they do is entirely down to the level design and, well, guess what ends up being the big major issue here. Right off the bat, before you even move, you can already see Rayman slide on over to the left ever so slightly. That's because this stage is essentially an ice level. Sure, it may not look like one, but functionally it is, being that slippery surfaces, depth spikes, and disappearing platforms. Now, when you pair that with all the would-be major issues like the really tiny platforms, slow movement, things coming at you from off-screen, not being able to punch good, and giant sprites with therefore narrow view, you end up with a world that I still could not finish. Some people have, I'm sure, but some people also think the earth is flat, so I'm not really gonna let that reflect on me in any way. Shit's just too hard. It's like Castlevania 1 on ice, with the worst lavish tendencies of the Euro platformer. A classic, a game worth of inclusion, an important footnote in platforming history. Yeah, absolutely, but it's also a game that can desperately go fuck itself. Confession time! I've never actually played this. Yeah, I know. You'd think that with me having played and reviewed shit like Dead Aim and the Game Boy game that I'd be well into the series, but aside from 4, 5, and Code Veronica, I've only played what I've reviewed, which means that I haven't ever fully tackled 2, 3, 0, Remake, and of course the OG. Now, granted, I did fumble through the DS version as a kid, I just never made it past the gunshot ceiling, which now... Don't worry, I'm not doing the Rayman thing again. It plays fine. I can play it fine. It's a bit old and weird and hard, but it's aged like fine fuck, in that all of that only made it better, which about covers it as well. I do want to do a proper video on this someday, but not an actual review exactly. I want to cover the mansion, the atmosphere of it, and how the graphics enhance it in the most bizarre way. You see, usually when games use pre-renders to use really good CG to make detail happen, like FF7, Oddworld, and indeed its own sequel, but RE1 is kinda lower budge in some aspects, and is also actually quite old, so the CG used is on D tier, which makes every room identifiable but ever so slightly off. I mean, just this low detail, bright orange wallpaper alone is not what you normally find in a house like this. But also just how everything's lit in this super unnatural manner makes for some proper uncanny shit. So I want to explore that, just not right now. In either case, though, yeah, this is a worthy inclusion. Although, what is weird is that they went with the garbage music edition. Just listen to this basement theme. Like, come on, Sony, everyone knows that it's supposed to sound like this. Man, Shin Megami Tensei games really do have the prettiest box art. I see. Game looks amazing though. Styling characters, styling music, though not as good as the PSP remake. Styling ass 3D hallways, styling ass everything. Of course, I can't really cover a game of this scope properly in a video like this, nor am I too sure if this is really all that great of an introduction to the SMT series. I mean, the localization here is fucking weird. Dudes referring to obvious Japan land as if it's in America, and more infamously, this one kid turning black. And don't get me wrong, I'm all for better representation, but, you know, not like this. Really makes you wonder why this is on the classic. Sure, yeah, it's a great game, but given the sheer volume of amazing RPGs on the system, they could have picked one with considerably less blackface. Though I guess I can see what they were going for, as A, Persona 5 big money, and B, P1 is sorta on a different level as any other PS1 games of the time. Atmospherically, narratively, thematically, it just feels very adult. Accomplished, pretty much. I mean, like, most other PS1 games feel more like the writers and designers and composers were like uncontrollable, excited puppies, finally free from the shackles of the evil toy company, being able to make something for grown-ups, and failing due to lack of experience, resulting in Metal Gear plot twists, FF7's writing, and Resident Evil's voice acting. Things that are fun, interesting, and great, but clearly not entirely intentional. But Persona, as I said, feels like it accomplishes that, as Atlus has been comfortably using adult themes for years at this point. Sure, the 3D is kinda derpy looking, and it's also rather strange to walk into a pharmacy, hear this song, only to then proceed to purchase a Bloodstone from the man with the Hitler mustache. But just the atmosphere of it all. The image of the kitty blocks falling over near hospital bed feels like it says so much already without it really saying anything. Besides, I could explore this lovely little mall for hours. So it deserves to be in this collection for that fact alone. The proper odd one out, so to say, that was actually ahead of its time in so many weird ways, yet also entirely in its own ballpark, with all of the weird satanic shit and its realistic real-life settings. Just, you know, a bit of a bitch to play, to be honest, and also the localization ruins pretty much everything I just went over, but an important game nonetheless.
I'll game ending myself.
Demo discs. Those were a big thing during the PS1's heyday. You could get them from Sony, if you stocked them with letters, from catalogs, and of course from magazines. What was good about these demos anyway was that they weren't afraid to include weird shit. Something high profile like Metal Gear would just be a video, but fucking Devil Dice or Hogs of War or Destrega would have a decently sized playable chunk that really gave you a good impression of what those games were about. Some, though, would offer a bit less in terms of playability, like, yeah, sure, it was neat that Tony Hawk's 2 was on one of these, but, you know, it would have been fun to have more than one level, and similarly, I barely even got an impression of what R4 Ridge Racer's deal even was. I mean, I had dabbled with the first game, and being that 4's demo only had one raceable track with nothing else fancy going on, I've always just assumed that the entire series was like the first one. Simple, arcadey racing with a few tracks, a handful of cars, but nothing insane like visual novel story modes or buck wild art styles and pretty FMV ladies. Boy, was I wrong. For one, these fucking menus. Holy shit. And then you got these teams and their companies with the logos and backgrounds looking armored core as fuck. And all of the music being like this really sleek, jazzy drum and bass. And then also these fancy transitions everywhere, and then boom. Dialogue, story, characters, fucking yellow. I just clicked Grand Prix. I was expecting to just get some fucking courses and shit, Mario Kart CC style. But nope, this is stylized all the way. Hyper stylized even. But still, cars racing. You got loads, because there's these made-up manufacturers and they'll all handle it that differently as the game and your buddy will inform you. My car had a bit of swerve in the trunk, which I could legit feel as well. And the tracks are also really flashy, with planes flying over and great lighting contrasts and very carefully composed camera angles during the show-offs, and of course more drum and bass. I don't know if I really have enough knowledge of racers, let alone actual cars, to give a very in-depth analysis here, but man, this feels like a car fetish game if I've ever seen one. Not to say that the game is simmy exactly, as you can drift like a lightning fast motherfucker, correct way easy without too much resistance, and are also free to bump walls and other racers. But then, I also have no clue what any of these icons mean and what AT and MT are, but you can choose between them to do car things. It's really great though. Tracks are well designed with varied turns and tons of visual variety, and the AI doesn't feel unfair or rubber bandy either. Always giving you enough of a challenge to where you spend most of the race catching up, but zero time being overtaken despite your best efforts. Basically, R4 is smooth in every sense of the word. So, this is a weird-ass choice if I ever saw one. Like, was this game all that big of a deal? I knew it existed, sorta, but I don't think I've ever really heard anyone sing its praises much or really bring it up, like, anywhere. Also, PS1 Street Fighter. Where's Alpha? Or fucking EX2 Plus? That's one PS1-ass game. And is there a Super Puzzle Fighter 1? Or a Super Puzzle Fighter 2 regular edition? Would Capcom lie? Yes. But yeah, it's one of those Tetris-y games that I personally don't really care for. My voice! That I personally don't really care for, but will admit are good fun. I just have the attention span of a spoiled child and thus have a hard time. Did you ever trade borrow games with a friend because they wanted something cool you had? And because you wanted to play a game too, you asked for something in return, only for them to just give you whatever? Well, that's what Siphon Filter was for me. Just a big pile of, what the fuck? What do I do? Which is still how I feel today. Blockman and Blockhead over here are in the jungle, you see, and then they're in snow, and then there's a virus, and so they need to kill some guy proper covert, but then cars just explode and you're just kind of running around shooting guys, and I have no clue what kind of tone, genre, or style any of this is going for, and not in that exciting Deadly Premonition way either. What I do know is that the Bubsy 3D people made this, which will haunt them forever due to people like me bringing it up, and that GoldenEye and Metal Gear Solid had also come out before it, not to mention a very successful spy movie starring a real-life Blockhead. No, not that one. Yeah, him. Which does make things a bit clearer, as clearly they just wanted that big Holly spy action where shit's supposed to be stealthy but in a way in which everything still blows. So it's a run-of-the-mill shooter that's pretty fucking playable for its time. Sure, these tank controls have the biggest swerve ever, but you can lock on, strafe, combat roll, and shoot from behind cover. It ain't no win back, but for sure a step up from shit like Tomb Raider in terms of shooting in third person. Though I guess it is a bit too vague for its own good. Not that it's impossible to figure things out, but things like vaulting, popping locks, and friendly fire aren't really explained or telegraphed in any meaningful way. Pixel hunting a lock on a door, for example, with no sign of postage, with clever lighting or framing in sight is pretty fucking tedious as it is, even without the texture warp. Although, on the other hand, it can also be surprisingly modern, like MGS has loads of wee shit like that too, but there it's paraded around as if it's a big fucking deal, and in Filter it's already part of a regular. But the level design overall just tends to bring it all down, really. Crucial switches, hidden in pitch black, movement that don't complement the tight corners, and tight corners that don't complement the movement. And of course, the old chestnut that is shitty checkpoints. It's not really great, but for its time, certainly fine. Or at the very least, a fuck of a whole lot better than... Why? Really? Why? Rainbow Six is a classic, revolutionary, intense tactical FPS that still does a thing not many games have done since, but it did that thing on the PC, and I get it, they wanted an FPS, but like, why not Medal of Honor, you know? The game exclusive to the PS1, part of a series that together with the team behind GoldenEye would literally set in motion the entirety of console shooters. Call of Duty literally flopped out of Medal of Honor's ass. EA might not respect it anymore. Public conscience has probably largely forgotten about it already, and I guess that Sony has as well. But fucking Steven Spielberg worked on it, man. How is that not an interesting PS1 novelty? You could put that on the box too. Includes game directed by Steven Steinstein. But nah, instead we get this laggy, janky, jaggy, awfully controlling port of a game that you can get in HD on GOG for $10. Also, don't think I don't know. It's because of fucking Siege. The game that's popular as dick right now, which is what they're trying to capitalize on. The cheeky fucking weird-ass, half-assing ass, corporate-ass motherfucker. I mean, yeah, this says it all, really. Like, what even is this? Flaming clowns in cars shooting at each other to metal music. If you were to distill down the parts of American culture that gave way to bacon smoothies, the WWE, Hooters, and the curiously allowed and sadly continued existence of Steven Seagal and his movies, then you'd probably end up with this. A vehicular combat game in which you drive car and shoot car from car and with car. All the while circling around each other trying to get shit in frame to flame, hoping to fuck that your spray of bullets will hit something. Perhaps this is one of those games best played with friends, or its many sequels actually making things good gradually as... I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something here, but this just feels empty. Not like arcade game empty either. More like, we had a really short deadline and David Jaffee kept snorting cocaine and... defending Nazis on Twitter, apparently. And so we ended up with this. Empty. It's part of a first-party series that, at least in the States, was a big deal for a while, so it deserves to be on here for sure. Just... yeah, not really for me, I guess. I'm sorry. When thinking of big JRPG developers, it's usually the same three that spring to mind. Square, Atlus, and Till Studio. For those more in the know, Falcom would make that list too, and some would probably also be like, but Capcom and Konami! For they too had decently long-running and successful series, but obviously that ain't everything. There's also Camelot, who did the Golden Sun and Shining Force, Game Arts, who did the Lunars and the Granias, Compile Heart with their Hyperdimension games, and there's also loads of other devs who mostly had their games stay in Japan. However, there is one developer who's been at it for decades, yet is rarely thought of as a JRPG superpower. Probably because they work for bigger publishers who then plaster their names and logos all over their work. That company being Mediavision, who, among other titles, have been doing the Valkyria Chronicles series for Sega, the Chaos Ring games for Square, and a handful of Digimon RPGs in recent years, and, of course, also Wild Arms. A game not about angry Italians, but about ripping off every cowboy trope under the sun, including some musical motifs from Morricone's scores, but, you know, just don't tell anyone about those. And then stuffing them into one big, epic, SNES-style RPG with the aliens and robots and castles and a whole lot of not Final Fantasy VII, hence why people slept on it back when it was new. It's a traditional JRPG, you see, where you play as a mute boy from a small town with a special power that people are racist against, but luckily princess and swashbuckler who be like, yo, and thus adventures will ensue. Combat is turn-based but meaty, the story is predictable but charming, and so on and so forth. It's a great video game. Somewhat of an odd pick in some ways, given that there's many big-money JRPGs on the system, but not a bad one at all and equally deserving if you ask me. I will properly review this someday in any case. Mini reviews don't really work all that well for big games. And besides, this version also has audio issues because badly optimized emulation. Right on the first fucking screen as well. Just genius. If If I wasn't going to make this video and violently hack this bitch, then I would not have bought the PlayStation Classic. Yes, good games are on here, but $100 for a piece of plastic with about 5% of your average SD card's worth of shit on it, shit that includes the PS1 port of Rainbow Six, is not a deal that anyone should want. Which is sad, really, as in concept, this could have been great. It could have had games that are super rare and expensive, like Tronbon or Suikoden. Or some games that are great, but not many people know about, like Valkyrie Profile or Hogs of War. And most of all,
Where is Lego Island 2?
truly the greatest PS1 game. I get that this probably costed them more than simply ROM dumping to an SD card because of licensing, but even then there could have been more, as their own first-party output is woefully underrepresented, and I would at least imagine that they have the rights to their own fucking games. Right? Sony? You do have those, right? Sony? And I get it, people are gonna have their own lists and they can't please everybody, but as it is now, I don't think they're pleasing anybody. It doesn't really preserve the PS1's legacy, introduce people to its wild and wacky library all that well, show them all of the essential classics, or introduce them to many a hidden gem. It could have done one of those things, it could have done all of those things, but instead, it does none of those things. Add to that the ugly menu and the fact that these are all really badly converted versions, and you just end up with a big pile of meh. But hey, at least I got a cute little Raspberry Pi out of it and 2 videos that I can look back on with pride, so that's basically a win-win.